All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving headfirst into a world where rivers aren't just, flowing water. They're like these geopolitical battlegrounds.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we're talking about water sharing
Yeah.
between India and Bangladesh. And think about this. These two countries, they share a whopping 54 rivers.
That's a lot of rivers.
Yeah, so it's like a recipe for conflict, but also cooperation. And the implications are huge.
Huge, yeah.
They go way beyond just maps and treaties.
Right.
We're talking about the lives and livelihoods of millions of people,
Millions.
delicate ecosystems, even, national pride gets tied into this.
Oh, yeah. National identity is a big part of it. It's fascinating, really. Just think about the sheer scale of these rivers. The Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
These rivers are lifelines for agriculture, drinking water, transportation, so much more.
Exactly. They're like woven into the very fabric of life in both these countries.
Absolutely.
Not just lines on a map. So to kind of guide us through this really complex landscape, we're looking at a research paper today
Okay.
from the International Journal of Applied and Advanced Multidisciplinary Research.
Catchy.
Yeah, right? And it's called Water Sharing Geopolitics Between India and Bangladesh, Recent Trends.
Okay, great title.
Yeah, and to give you a sense of just how crucial this is, the research highlights that, like, a staggering 84% of Bangladesh's water
Wow.
comes from these shared, transboundary rivers.
84, that's most of their water, that's right.
Sure.
Compare that to India, which has, more diverse water sources.
Right.
This dependence creates like a real power imbalance.
Yeah.
Where decisions made upstream in India, they can really impact Bangladesh.
Wow. 84%. It's almost like having your fate tied to like someone else's faucet, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
I mean, how would you feel knowing another country had that much power over something as basic as water?
It's got to be unsettling, right?
Yeah, you can see how tensions could arise.
Absolutely. And history shows us that.
Yeah.
One of the biggest flashpoints has been the Farakka Barrage, built by India in 1975.
The Farakka Barrage. This seems like a turning point almost in the relationship between these two countries.
Yeah.
Can you kind of walk us through like why it became such a source of tension?
Sure. So initially, after independence, India and Bangladesh, they actually had pretty good cooperation on water.
Okay.
They even formed the Joint Rivers Commission,
Okay.
or JRC,
Yeah.
in 1972 to manage these shared resources. But the construction of the Farakka Barrage, which was intended to divert water from the Ganges to help with navigation in India,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of changed everything.
So it was meant to solve a problem for India, but what were like the unintended consequences downstream?
Well, Bangladesh felt like its water supply was being restricted unfairly,
Okay.
and it led to accusations, rising tensions, and even claims that the barrage made natural disasters worse,
Right.
droughts and floods.
Oh, wow.
The whole situation became a symbol of the unequal power dynamic.
Yeah. It sounds like what started as like this hopeful cooperation
Right?
turned into finger pointing and blame.
It did. Yeah.
Did this conflict ever de-escalate?
Eventually, yeah. After years of back and forth, India and Bangladesh signed the Ganges Water Sharing Treaty in 1996,
Okay.
a 30-year agreement to try to address some of the key issues and ensure a more equitable distribution of water.
A 30-year agreement, that sounds like a step towards stability, wouldn't you say? Did it actually resolve like the underlying issues though?
It helped, for sure,
Yeah.
ease tensions.
Uh-huh.
But the situation is, it's complicated.
Okay.
Even India has started to deal with the long-term consequences of the Farakka Barrage. The paper points to Figure 2, which shows how the barrage has caused siltation and erosion problems on the Indian side.
Wait, so the very structure that was supposed to solve a problem for India created new ones?
Basically, yeah.
That's ironic. It really shows how interconnected these water systems are, how actions in one place can have ripple effects
Exactly.
far downstream.
It underscores the need for a more holistic, cooperative approach to water management. And that leads us to another major point of contention: the Teesta River.
Ah, yes, the Teesta.
Yeah.
The research calls this the current sticking point, right? Years of negotiations, a near deal in 2011, but still no treaty. What's preventing a resolution in this case?
Internal politics plays a huge role here.
Yeah.
The paper specifically mentions West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee.
Right, she's voiced concerns about the impact on her state, right?
Yeah.
Especially the farmers who rely on the Teesta's water. It's a reminder that these aren't just like abstract geopolitical issues.
Right.
They have real consequences for people on the ground.
Absolutely. Real people's lives.
It almost seems like a game of political chess with national interests and regional concerns and even individual ambitions all tangled up.
Yeah, good analogy.
In this struggle over water.
These disputes aren't just between countries. They're within them, too.
Yeah.
With different states and interest groups all fighting for their share. Yeah.
It makes you wonder why, if water is such a vital resource and such a potential source of conflict, why it seems to be deprioritized sometimes, especially by India. What are some of the factors that contribute to this, according to the research?
Well, one of the most surprising findings to me was the lack of reliable data on water resources in the region.
Wait, are you saying they're trying to divide the water without knowing how much there is?
In a way, yeah.
That sounds almost impossible.
It's a big obstacle, for sure.
Okay.
The research suggests this lack of shared data makes it really hard to negotiate fair agreements.
It makes sense. I mean, without a clear understanding of the baseline, how can you even determine what a fair share is?
Exactly. It's tough.
It's like trying to, split a pie when nobody knows how big the pie is. It's bound to lead to, suspicion and mistrust.
You got it.
Yeah.
And on top of that, both sides use water as a bargaining chip sometimes.
Okay.
For other political goals.
Okay.
Which can overshadow the need for practical solutions.
So it becomes less about finding a win-win and more about who can outmaneuver the other.
Sometimes, yeah. It can get pretty tricky.
It paints a kind of grim picture, doesn't it? But surely there are some glimmers of hope, right? What does the research say about potential for positive change?
There are some positive signs, thankfully.
Yeah.
The research, it points to a recent memorandum of understanding.
Okay.
Or MOU, on sharing water from the Feni River.
Yeah.
For drinking water supply in India.
So even amidst all these complex, geopolitical issues, there are, instances of cooperation.
There are, yeah.
Tell me more about this Feni River agreement. Is it significant enough to, suggest a shift towards, a more collaborative approach?
It's definitely a positive development. It's a relatively small project providing drinking water to Sabrum town in India.
Okay.
But it shows that cooperation is possible, even on sensitive issues.
It's a bit like a small crack in a wall, a sign that even these seemingly impenetrable barriers can be breached.
I like that, yeah.
But can these small-scale projects really address the larger, more contentious issues? I mean, we're talking about rivers that are vital to entire nations here.
You're right. While these smaller projects are important for building trust, showing the benefits of cooperation, they're not a cure-all. The research really emphasizes a more comprehensive approach to water management is needed.
Okay, so let's unpack that. What does an integrated approach actually look like here?
It means moving away from those ad hoc short-term agreements.
Okay.
And towards a holistic basin-wide approach.
Okay.
It's not about focusing on individual segments or projects. It's about managing entire river systems sustainably. Recognizing how interconnected these water resources are and their impact on all these different sectors.
So taking a step back, looking at the bigger picture, rather than getting bogged down in piecemeal solutions.
Exactly.
Makes sense. It also sounds incredibly complex.
It is. It can be.
Where do you even begin to implement something like that?
Well, the research suggests the key starting point is empowering and transforming the existing Joint Rivers Commission.
Okay.
Remember the JRC, formed back in 1972.
Ah, yeah, the JRC.
But it's often been criticized for being more talk than action.
Ah, so it's not enough to just have a forum for dialogue. They need the authority, resources, and the expertise to actually implement solutions.
That's exactly it. The research argues that the JRC, it needs to be equipped to make decisions, enforce agreements, effectively address those complex challenges that come with transboundary water management. And this includes having access to accurate shared data.
Right. It all comes back to that lack of reliable data.
Yeah.
How can they possibly make informed decisions, let alone, enforce agreements without a clear understanding of the resource they're managing?
It's a fundamental issue. That's why the research really pushes for joint data collection and research initiatives.
Okay.
Both countries need to invest in building a solid shared understanding of their water resources. everything from rainfall patterns to groundwater levels to the impacts of climate change.
It seems like transparency and data sharing would be so crucial, not just for, building trust between the countries, but also for engaging their citizens.
Exactly. The research emphasizes greater public awareness and engagement on water issues is essential.
Because informed citizens are more likely to hold their leaders accountable and push for policies that prioritize that long-term sustainability over short-term political gains.
Precisely. It's about educating citizens on the importance of water, the challenges of transboundary rivers, and the potential benefits of cooperation.
So it's not just about, governments negotiating treaties behind closed doors. It's about empowering people on both sides of the border to understand these issues and advocate for solutions.
It's about changing the whole narrative, right?
Yeah.
From conflict and competition over water to one that recognizes it as a shared resource, a shared responsibility, a shared opportunity.
From us versus them to we're in this together. It's a powerful idea, but is it realistic?
Yeah.
Given, the long history of mistrust and competing interests.
It's challenging, for sure. But the research argues that the alternative, continuing down a path of conflict, unsustainable water management, it's not acceptable.
Yeah.
The potential consequences, they're too serious.
We're talking economic losses, environmental degradation, social unrest, even the possibility of actual conflict.
Right. The stakes they're high.
So how do we move from these high-level ideas about cooperation and public awareness to concrete actions? What specific steps can these countries take to bridge that gap between good intentions and tangible outcomes?
One practical suggestion is to start with those smaller, more achievable projects.
Okay.
Ones that build trust and demonstrate the benefits of cooperation.
Like the Teesta River Mo, where they're starting with a smaller project to supply drinking water and hopefully build momentum from there.
Exactly. It's about creating a sense of shared success, showing that cooperation, it can actually deliver benefits for both sides. And from there, they can slowly expand the scope of collaboration to include those larger rivers, the more complex issues.
So it's a bit like building a bridge, brick by brick.
Yeah, like that.
Starting with that solid foundation and gradually extending it across the divide.
A good visual. But it's not just about those government-to-government agreements either. The research also highlights the importance of those people-to-people connections.
Right. Building bridges, not just between governments, but between, communities, academics, artists, everyday citizens. Could you kind of elaborate on what the research suggests in terms of fostering those people-to-people connections?
They suggest encouraging things like cultural exchanges, educational partnerships, even tourism between the countries. These kinds of interactions, they can help break down stereotypes, build understanding, create a sense of shared identity.
It's about recognizing that common humanity that binds us, despite political differences or historical grievances.
It is. It's powerful.
Seems like such a simple idea, yet so powerful.
It is. And those connections, they create a more fertile ground for cooperation.
Yeah.
On those challenging issues like water share.
Yeah.
It's easier to find solutions when you see the other, not as an adversary, but as a neighbor facing similar challenges.
It's a shift from seeing the river as a dividing line to seeing it as a connecting point.
I like that. Yeah.
So it's not just about treaties and, technical solutions. It's about building relationships, fostering trust, changing the narrative. But what about concrete recommendations? Does the research offer any specific guidance on how to translate these ideas into actionable steps?
Absolutely. The research, it goes beyond these high-level concepts. It delves into specific areas where this integrated approach can make a difference. One key area, hydropower development.
Hydropower, that's a tricky one. I remember reading about concerns over India's hydropower projects.
Yeah.
In the Himalayan region and their potential impact on downstream water flow into Bangladesh.
Right. The research acknowledges those concerns and stresses that these projects, they need to be developed very carefully to minimize negative impacts on those downstream communities and ecosystems. It's about finding a balance between India's energy needs and Bangladesh's water security.
So it's not about saying no to hydropower completely, but about finding ways to develop it sustainably, equitably, in a way that benefits both countries.
That's the goal. And that requires cooperation, sharing data, conducting joint environmental impact assessments, exploring ways to kind of mitigate potential harm. It's about turning a point of conflict into an opportunity to collaborate.
It seems like a perfect example of how a shared challenge can actually become like a catalyst for cooperation.
It can.
If both sides are willing to come to the table with that spirit of collaboration.
Absolutely. It takes a willingness to work together.
Were there other areas where this integrated approach could be applied?
For sure. The research highlights flood control. Both India and Bangladesh, they're highly vulnerable to flooding, especially during monsoon season. And this is only going to get worse with climate change.
Right. And we talked earlier about how Bangladesh has often accused India of making flooding worse through its water management practices. It's a sensitive issue, to say the least.
It is. But the research suggests that instead of blaming each other, both countries, they need to work together to develop effective flood control strategies.
Okay.
This could include things like joint research to understand flood patterns, coordinated early warning systems, improved infrastructure, even reforestation efforts to reduce runoff.
It's recognizing that they're facing a common enemy.
They are.
In these devastating floods, and that they're stronger together than they are apart.
Absolutely. And by working together, they can reduce those devastating impacts of flooding on both sides of the border.
So we've seen how this integrated approach could apply to hydropower and flood control. Any other areas the research highlights?
Yes. Navigation and trade. These rivers aren't just about water. They're also vital transportation routes and arteries of commerce.
That's right. The paper mentioned the importance of these rivers for both transportation and trade between the two countries. But how can they cooperate more effectively in these areas?
The research suggests working together to improve navigability, harmonize regulations, and reduce barriers to trade.
Okay.
Both countries can benefit economically. It's about seeing these rivers not as obstacles or dividing lines, but as connecting points that facilitate the flow of goods and people.
It's about transforming potential points of friction into engines of economic growth and regional integration. It's incredible how water can be both a source of conflict and a catalyst for cooperation, all depending on how we choose to approach it. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to the research paper's recommendations. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the need for, data sharing and public awareness to the potential for integrated water management across multiple sectors. What are the key takeaways?
The paper's main message is this: sustainable water management in this region. It requires a fundamental shift in mindset from one of competition to cooperation.
So moving away from short-term thinking and zero-sum games towards a more holistic, long-term vision of shared prosperity and sustainability.
Exactly. It's recognizing that the destinies of India and Bangladesh are intertwined, especially when it comes to water. Actions upstream, they have consequences downstream. And cooperation, it's not optional, it's a necessity for ensuring a future where both countries can thrive.
It's a powerful call to action. But it begs the question, how do we move from these high-level recommendations to concrete action? What are the next steps according to the research?
Well, the research doesn't give us the step-by-step roadmap.
Okay.
But it does offer some valuable guidance.
Perfect. Let's explore those recommendations in the final part of our deep dive. All right, let's dig into those recommendations. I'm particularly interested in how we can actually translate these big ideas of cooperation and integrated water management into, concrete actions. What's the research paper's take on this?
Well, the paper really stresses confidence-building measures as a crucial first step.
Confidence-building measures. What does that look like in practice?
It's about starting with smaller, less contentious projects that can clearly demonstrate the benefits of cooperation. Think of it like dipping your toes in the water before jumping in the deep end.
So kind of like testing the waters, proving that collaboration can actually work before you tackle the more complex and sensitive issues.
Exactly. And the recent MOU on the Feni River, the one we talked about earlier, that's a good example of this approach.
Right.
It's a relatively small project, but it shows that cooperation is possible, even on a sensitive issue like transboundary water sharing.
And it provides drinking water to people in India, so it has immediate practical benefits for both countries.
Yeah, exactly. By starting with these smaller successes, they can build momentum, right? Create that positive feedback loop, where each act of cooperation makes the next one more likely.
It's about building trust, one project at a time. But the research also highlights going beyond just government-to-government agreements, right?
Absolutely. They emphasize the role of people-to-people connections in creating a more cooperative environment.
So fostering those connections through, cultural exchanges, student exchange programs, collaborative research projects, even tourism, those kinds of things, right? Initiatives that allow people on both sides of the border to actually interact and get to know each other better.
Exactly. These kinds of interactions, they help break down stereotypes, build understanding, and create a shared identity. It's about humanizing, the other and recognizing the common ground that we share.
It's about recognizing that, we have more in common than what divides us, that we're all part of this intricate web of life that's connected by these rivers.
Well said.
But shifting perspectives like that, it takes time and effort, doesn't it?
It does. It takes leadership, vision, and a real commitment from both sides to nurture these people-to-people connections and build that, foundation of trust.
It's about investing in relationships, not just infrastructure. So we've talked about these confidence-building measures and the importance of those people-to-people connections. What other guidance does the research offer for turning these ideas into, actionable steps?
The research highlights using a multi-track approach that involves not just governments, but also civil society organizations, academics, and local communities.
So bringing diverse voices to the table, making sure that those who are most directly impacted by these water management decisions, that they have a say.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that governments can't do it alone. They need that expertise, the on-the-ground knowledge, the buy-in from local communities to develop really sustainable and equitable solutions.
It's about empowering the people who are often the most vulnerable to the impacts of water scarcity or mismanagement to be a part of the solution. Does the paper give any specific examples of how this multi-track approach could work?
It suggests supporting joint research initiatives that bring together scientists and researchers from both countries to study the shared water resources and collaborate on solutions to common challenges.
So rather than competing for knowledge, they're pooling their resources and their expertise to gain a deeper understanding of these really complex systems.
Right.
Sounds like a much more effective way to address these transboundary issues.
It is, yeah. And it can help to build trust and a sense of shared ownership over the solutions that emerge.
It's a powerful example of how science and collaboration can really transcend those political divides. We've covered so much today, from the historical context of these water disputes to the potential for a more, cooperative and sustainable future.
As we wrap up, I'm curious, do you think this region could actually become a model for other parts of the world that are dealing with similar transboundary water challenges? I think it's definitely possible. The challenges are huge, but so is the potential. If India and Bangladesh can overcome that history of mistrust and embrace cooperation, they could become a real beacon of hope for other countries facing these kinds of water conflicts.
It's an inspiring thought that, from all this conflict, a new model of cooperation could emerge, showing that these shared challenges can actually become shared opportunities for peace and prosperity.
It all starts with a willingness to talk, to build trust, to share knowledge, and to work together.
Well said. It's a reminder that the future isn't set in stone. It's shaped by the choices that we make to cooperate, to innovate, to put the well-being of people and the planet first. It's been a fantastic deep dive, and I encourage our listeners to check out the full research paper if they're interested in learning more.
It's a complex issue that's constantly evolving, but one that deserves our attention and our best efforts to find solutions that work for everyone.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep those brain waves flowing.